this. Okay. All right, so let's try this one more time. Hopefully the volume's fine and everything like that. Again, this is it's a little funky. You know what I mean? It's a little funky, so it is what it is. But I can't complain. You know, I would complain. I miss Hangouts. It was very easy. Now it's not so easy. That's kind of annoying. But again, just let me know if it's working properly or not. Let me know if there's like anything off, if like the volume is off or anything like that. Just, you know, just kind of like keep me like in the loop in that sense if you're watching, and if you can just kind of like put in a comment in the comment section. Just let me know. This is like one of the worst times for it to kind of go off in the way that it is, but whatever, it is what it is. I gotta get used to this because this is like different. Usually with Hangouts, it would sort of tell you like, oh, this is when you're gonna start, like you're live now, so like start, like, you know, start talking now and do it in this particular way, right? Now it's like OBS is weird. I don't know if you can set up anything to, you know, set that up, but it's odd. Yeah, the fan. I gotta figure out how to do the filter on Beyond's House. I gotta figure out how to do the filter for it. But you, like, it's supposed to be like an AC that's not so like loud, but everything is sort of like in there now. So before it was a bit easier. I could, you know, sort of like tune that stuff out. But I don't know. I'm just gonna do the video for now, and then, you know, whatever happens. Yeah. Like it isn't sick. I don't know how to sort of fix that. I guess like what I'll do is maybe I'll do like a test run. I don't know how to fix that. You know what? Here's what I'll do. I'll use this sort of to act as a test run. I'll change like the title to like, instead of remembering Toni Morrison, to test run for OBS. And this is like really annoying. It was so much easier with Hangouts. It just like did that stuff for you. Now I have to do this all, like, it's just annoying. You know, I have to like set it up properly. You know, it's just frustrating. But it'll sort of just be like test run for OBS, but also like, you know, just kind of remembering Toni Morrison in that way. Hopefully it's not too like ridiculous. But yeah. All right. So, and I'm not sure how to fix that lag. I think that's the thing that's like bugging me about OBS. Like, I'm like, I don't really know where to begin to do that. I don't know what the duration is. Maybe I have to change that. Maybe that'll help. Yeah, I don't know. Just change it. So maybe that'll help, if anything. So let me know. Let me know if that helps a bit. I just switched it up a little bit. I think there was like a bit of lag, but I just changed it up. So if this audio is just fixed up, let me know if the audio is like better. If it's not better, let me know. All right. Again, it's just like a test run for OBS. At this point, this is what this video is for. And I wanted to stream tonight to talk about Toni Morrison and like just to kind of get my thoughts out. But now I'm sort of annoyed because, like, again, OBS is like not something that I'm used to. I tried to do it at the beginning when I started this stream, like when I started this channel, and it was just like annoying. And then I figured out how to use Hangouts, and Hangouts was much easier, and like it was just easier to set up. Now I got to do all this OBS like stuff, and it's like a little frustrating. And I got to figure out how to like sort of filter out the background noise, because now that's gonna be a thing. And you know, like my cats do things. My cats are gonna be much like a bit louder now. If they start meowing and stuff like that. You know, if my fiance is like sort of moving around the apartment, that stuff that like you might hear, things like that. I just gotta be better. I gotta figure out how to filter that stuff out. But for now, you know, just let me know if, you know, things are sort of like off. And if they are, then okay. But if they're not, then, you know, good. All right. All right. So maybe I'll try to do it anyways. I'll be like test run for OBS and sort of like a discussion of Toni Morrison. So I'll do that now. Maybe I'll turn off my AC. Maybe that's why it's so loud. Try that. Okay, so that might help. All right. Yeah, I think that helps a bit. Let me turn it on, see how that affects the volume. Yeah, it does change. Oh, it changes it quite a bit. I think a little bit, a little bit. All right, I'm gonna turn that off for now. But we gotta talk about this. We gotta talk about Toni Morrison, man. Like, all right, so y'all already know. Like I'm a reader. All right, this is who I am. Like I've been this way since I can remember. Like even like my parents, like they told me like I would just like I don't know how old I was. I was probably like 2 or 3 or something like that. But they were like, oh, he had a newspaper in front of him and he didn't even know what he was reading, but he would try to read and stuff like that. Like that's like that's like a big part of who I am. It isn't necessarily like like that's not all of me. Like I'm not like a reader and that's it, obviously. But I think you know what I mean? Like yeah, it's hot. It's hot. Okay. So thank you for that. I'm gonna keep it off for now. Hopefully that helps out a bit. Um, but I'm gonna do this. All right. So I'm gonna talk about Toni Morrison and how I sort of feel about that loss and just like why I think it's really important that people have this discussion and even within this community, right? Like this is like right. We call this like the anime manga community, but even within like this community, it's like super important that I like to me like if you haven't read Toni Morrison let's say like if you haven't read a Toni Morrison novel or critical text or anything like that or like her speeches, meditations, whatever, like this is something that like and right and again like I said in my tweet like there are always extenuating circumstances for certain things. Like there might be a reason why you haven't done that. Maybe it's not available in a particular way. Maybe there's like maybe you have a particular reason for not being able to sort of tackle the text in the way that they're sort of published, that sort of thing, right? There are always the things, but or maybe you're just like very young and like you like wherever you are you just never heard of Toni Morrison and the people around you don't mention her at all, and that might be a thing. But even then, like you gotta get on that. You gotta read something, or at the very least, you have to like talk with people and be like, "Yo, I don't know where to start." Like people are telling me, "Yo, you definitely have to check out Toni Morrison." Where to start? Like I mean, there are so many like options. If it was up to me, I think The Bluest Eye is always sort of where people sort of say this is where you can start if you're gonna start with Toni Morrison. Like The Bluest Eye is a good place to start. There are other books too, I think, that are just as like good to start with. But I think The Bluest Eye is probably the easiest in a way. All her books are difficult, I think, from like sort of an emotional standpoint. All her books are particularly difficult. But I think out of all of them, I think The Bluest Eye is the one that people tend to sort of are introduced to first. So if I were to suggest like a book where you would start, I would say The Bluest Eye is the one where is the book to start with. Then maybe like you can move on to like the other books. Once you've read The Bluest Eye, then I think you could just move on to any other sort of Morrison. But I think for me, like I had a class when I was Naya, what's good, my guy. And what's up, Haley? What's up, Beyond Solace? But when I was in my undergrad, when I was pursuing my doctorate degree, the doctoral degree with the PhD. Before I left the program, I was just like, same for me. But it just wasn't for me. And I've explained that like in the past why it wasn't for me and why I'm like much happier now. But one of the classes I took was like a Morrison class. It was just like straight up Morrison. Like all we did was read Toni Morrison, and we read particular books. So we read Jazz, we read The Bluest Eye, we read Sula, we read Beloved, we read Song of Solomon, and then we read I want to say A Mercy. So we read those 6 books throughout the semester, and then we also read like some of her like other like her like more critical writings, like Playing in the Dark, certain meditations, like in other texts that collected her speeches and stuff like that. And we also watched the pretty famous her interview, like her interview after winning the Nobel Peace Prize in '93. And we watched that and we talked about it and we discussed that. It was big. Like it was like, I had to like write. We had to pick one of the books, and write like a paper on it, or we could do a different sort of project. I chose to do a paper, and my paper was on jazz, and that was like, it was just an overall like really really dope experience. It was like one of those experiences where like the teacher was a little off. She was a little weird, and like not like in just like she was clearly like in like I'm gonna retire soon mode, and you can tell like when a professor's in I'm gonna retire soon mode, you know what it is already. But still awesome course, learned so much. Had this like not even a newfound appreciation for Morrison, but just like it was like I already had an appreciation for Morrison, but it was like ramped up from like 9 to like 15. You know what I mean? So it was an amazing experience. I still have all those books. My fiance is also a massive Morrison fan, so we just have like we probably have like not every book that she's published, but like most of them here, including her more recent The Source of Self-Regard, which I highly suggest you check out. It's like so important for this political climate, for where we are in. For the just like the times that we're in, and it's just so necessary of a read for everybody. So for me, I think one of the reasons why Morrison is so essential, and not just to Black women in particular, right? I think like Morrison is like incredibly essential reading for Black women in general. But I think when it comes to talking about different sort of topics, when it comes to the Black community, when it comes to just like Blackness in general, Morrison is like one of the authors you must read if you're gonna have any sort of discussion about Blackness, the Black experience in different time periods, different political climates. A discussion of Black masculinity, discussion of what it means to be a Black woman in different settings. Just like she runs the gambit, and I think there is like the thing that I sort of is very interesting to me is that one thing that I always note is that usually, and this is not like 100%, right, but whenever I talk to Black women that are clearly like informed, have particular experiences, that sort of thing, they always note that they have read Morrison. They always note that they have read Morrison, right? And this is not just Black women, but I always sort of focus on Black women because Morrison's texts are particularly about Black women and the experience of the Black woman, right? And the trials and tribulations that the Black woman unfortunately goes through, right? So it's just like, y'all, like, if you are even trying to begin to understand the issues that Black women have gone through and still go through, like, Morrison is an author that you need to be privy to. You know what I mean? Like it's essential. It's essential reading. I don't think I've ever taken a class on in terms of like African American literature, or a class on Black literature, or a class on even like Poco lit and that sort of thing, right? When I say Poco lit, I mean like post-colonial lit, like right, and that sort of thing. Theory, whatever, courses on feminism, and feminist theory and that sort of thing. Anytime I've taken courses like that, like Black feminist theory, like, and thought, like, anytime I've taken courses on that, Morrison is always on the syllabus. That's like, you like, that's not to say that you must start there, but it is, again, it's so essential. You must read this stuff, right? And both the critical reading and the novels are of equal sort of importance, right? It's not like, I'm only gonna read the novels and then I got it. Like, it's like, now you gotta like go through it. if I were to start anywhere, I would start with The Bluest Eye. But I also think that to me, the book that I think one of the books that was most sort of important to me was was jazz, because I had to write on it, and it was something that I had to like really sort of look into write articles, criticism, the conversation surrounding Morrison's jazz. So that's like a book that's very like dear and close to me, and I adore it. Like I think it's so good. And a lot of people, whenever I sort of ask them like what's their sort of favorite Morrison, it's usually either Beloved, The Bluest Eye, or Jazz. It's usually one of those three. But sometimes Sula is also one. I think Sula is very well done. Song of Solomon, I think, is also extremely necessary, because like it's one of these books that's like clearly sort of like focused on black masculinity and the sort of the issues that sort of come up when talking about black masculinity, and the way in which black masculinity is both something that needs to be addressed and is particularly harmful, not only to right, like not only to black men themselves, but like to like black women. And so like to me it's like Song of Solomon might be a book that like I think if you're like a guy, that's somewhere that you could start with. So I'll say Song of Solomon, Bluest Eye, are sort of my two like go-tos, and maybe even Sula, and then sort of like branch out to like the other ones and sort of do it that way. But I think you could start anywhere, but I would say like the older ones are sort of a place to start. Like I would start with those. So that's where I would start. But again, like when it comes to sort of like discussions on race and whiteness and the ways in which whiteness is just so pervasive and is so enmeshed in the ways that we think about literature. Like if you majored in literature at any point in time, and you graduated like with a degree in literature, like that has to be something that like was discussed in a class that you took. I don't really like, I think, and if it wasn't, then like, oh man, yeah, like, that sucks, because it's just such an important sort of point to make, right? When we think about Harold Bloom, we think about his sort of like discussion of and sort of like coining of the term the anxiety of influence, right? And he's talking about how these sort of older, larger than life authors who have sort of who affected the literary climate in which they were in, and continue to affect the subsequent literary climates after they were deceased, and how authors sort of have to deal with that influence and sort of this anxiety that sort of comes up as a result of it. But the thing about that is like Morrison is sort of doing something very, very different and even sort of more important. And she's talking about the way in which like whiteness is extremely pervasive within the ways in which we think about literature, and even right, and in the ways that we sort of choose our literature and what books we choose to read, what sort of genres and which authors we're particularly enamored with. And why that is when we sort of start to sort of like read, right, when we start to read books, and the types of readers that we become like later on, right, stuff like that. Now I think I got lucky. Like I had a decent number of white professors. I mean that's like, you know, it's academia, right? It's like you're gonna have like a lot of them. But I got lucky because like I went to a CUNY. Like I went to school in New York City, and like CUNYs have like, you know, tons of like adjunct faculty from different places, adjuncts of color and that sort of thing. So I got lucky, and I got a chance to like meet so many dope people and dope intellectuals, scholars. So for me, it was like there was no way that I could like that like I wasn't gonna be introduced to that, you know. But even for me, like it took a bit. Like when I went through, like I was like a Victorianist, and like I was like, yo, Let's go. Charlotte Bronte. What's up? Let's do this. Emily Bronte. Charles Dickens. Anthony Trollope. Like, I was all about that. And then, and then it was like, oh. And then I was introduced to all these things. And and there was a program that I was a part of. And that program was like super essential to kind of like shifting gears for me. And just meeting so many other individuals that were like brilliant, just like brilliant minds, and they really pushed me to sort of like push myself and to read more and to expand my horizons and look into like sort of different fields and to understand what it means to really like read critical text and understand what you were reading and all of that, and to also understand when critical texts are particularly sort of like vanguards of whiteness, if you want to say. So for me, it was like, man, like once that happened, it was like, boom, I gotta go read some Octavia Butler, I gotta go read some Toni Morrison, I gotta go read some James Baldwin, I gotta go read some Harlem Renaissance poets. I mean, I was reading Harlem Renaissance poets before that particular sort of epiphany sort of like moment. But man, I'm telling you, man, they had me, Naya, they had us in the first half. All right. But that was tough. Like, I had to sort of like say, okay, let's break that down. Let's like make sure that, like for me, like that's why I had to be like sort of hyper aware of like what I was reading and what might be the issues in terms of what I was reading. That doesn't mean that, right? That's not to say like, I'm like, oh, I'm never going to read Charles Dickens' novel again. Oh, I don't have like a profound like love for Bleak House or anything like that. But it's like, or Jane Eyre, right? Or Bronte's Jane Eyre, or Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, or Anne Bronte's Agnes Grey. Like, it's not like I don't have any love for that. It's just, I understand that while I love those texts, they are problematic in particular ways, and I have to be able to discuss those problematics, as well as discuss like why I think those texts are useful and valuable in particular ways. So that's sort of the thing, right? It's like Morrison is like so essential because she brings that up consistently, right? And she has an entire sort of book that's surrounded around those questions of American literature and the whiteness of American literature and how pervasive that whiteness is. And it's like, once you have that sort of idea and you're sort of introduced to that particular sort of notion, or any sort of notion in general, it's like, I think to me it's very difficult to sort of like go all the way back, right? Like you're definitely gonna trip up, right? You're definitely gonna like be like, oh, look at this like author over here that's like super, that's super white and like is extremely racist, right? And like it's like you could read like Treasure Island, and for me, like if I was reading Treasure Island, I would have been like, oh, okay. If I was just like, oh, this is just what happened in the past. Like, here are these savages on this island, and here are these missionaries, like, trying to help these savages or whatever. And then, like, but if you're like, oh, this is a problem, right? Once that happens, Treasure Island is like a text that, like, to you is like, oh, this is egregious. Like, this is egregious, right? Once you're aware of sort of what Morrison is sort of, like, talking about, and other authors have also noted this, right? Susan Gubar, I want to say, right? And there were two women, and I'm trying to remember the text. I'm gonna look it up now. But she wrote so there are two women. Sandra Gilbert and Susan Gubar, right? And these are like right, and they wrote a seminal sort of text that like for Victorianists is like huge. It's important. It's like if you were a Victorianist, like that was one of the texts that that was it was something that you should read. It was something that you should definitely like check out. Mad Woman in the Attic. And one of the sort of like chapters within that text is focused on Bertha Mason, who's a character in Jane Eyre, who is Creole, who's a Creole from man, I'm trying to remember the island, but essentially it's like a horribly sort of like racist like moment within Jane Eyre. And the thing, right, and like if you're not aware of sort of like the whiteness of like American literature and how that is particularly pervasive, then you might just sort of jump over that and be like, oh, Bertha's just that crazy woman who was getting in the way of Rochester and Jane getting married. But like if you're like thinking about, right, if you're thinking about right, if you're thinking about how pervasive sort of whiteness is, then you must sort of like focus on that and talk about why that's such a problematic within Jane Eyre, and why Jean Rhys, the author, felt that she needed to write Wide Sargasso Sea. You know what I mean? Which sort of takes the character of Bertha Mason and gives her agency and gives her a voice and that sort of thing, right? And gives her a narrative and makes her the focus. So it's like, why, like, right? So it's like the difference is like someone who just reads Jane Eyre and is like, Jane Eyre's so great, I love that, Jane, Rochester. All right, Sindred is trash, but yay, Jane and Rochester, right? And you're focused on the whiteness of it, and the difference, and then someone who's like, oh, okay, I see that there's a problematic here in Bertha Mason as a character in her presentation, and I also need to be aware of Wide Sargasso Sea and sort of read those texts in tandem and see how Wide Sargasso Sea is very much so kind of like a critique of that depiction within Jane Eyre. So it's stuff like that you just have to be like aware of, you know, and that's sort of the thing, right? And for me, it was like, whoa. Once I started doing that, and I think the thing is like, it's not to say that like, oh, like if you do that, like you're like go into the garbage can. It's more like you just have to sort of just be critical when it comes to that sort of thing. It's like if you read William Thackeray's Vanity Fair, you got to be aware, right? You got to be aware of like, oh, give me a sec, I'll be right back. Right, you got to be aware of right, like if you're reading, let's say like Vanity Fair, right, you got to be aware of the depiction of Sambo in Vanity Fair, and of, I can't remember there's a woman who is basically like black, who like is basically like a sort of mammy figure like within Vanity Fair. And that was something that I had to write a paper about when I was in another one of my classes, because I was like, this is like absurd. It was just absurd, right? And there are some people who just be like, oh, this is like the time, it is what it is, it's not a big deal. But like if you're aware of that stuff, then you're like, nah, this is an issue, we got to talk about this is wild, all right? But then you would have some people who'd be like, oh, you think that's such a big deal? I had people in my classroom sort of say like, you know, couple. I was like, I don't know if this is necessarily something that's like particularly, you know. I was like, what? And it's like if I showed you that photo, you'd understand. And you could just search up Vanity Fair and like racist caricature, and it'll pop up. And it's like related to the Hottentot Venus, and that's mentioned. And like it's just, there's a lot of stuff that's just like a mess, just a mess. So I would say, you know, just like be aware, and I think Morrison is very helpful in terms of sort of doing that. I think, like, to me, like Morrison is super helpful when it comes to just like a critique of whiteness and the pervasiveness of whiteness, right? So to me, there are just certain authors that like you must read, and Morrison is one of them because she is so adamant about it. So that's why it's so sort of like devastating to me, because she was one of the authors that really allowed me to open sort of like open my eyes in a sense, and make me even more sort of aware and even more critical of particular things when it comes to that. So that's why to me it's like whenever I see folks just like, you know, sharing they will share the same white dude science fiction or fantasy authors, and it's not to say that like, oh, don't share those dudes or anything like that. But it's like you have to sort of like open up your scope. It's like if you're gonna like give like science fiction suggestions to individuals, like it doesn't make sense to like mention like a Robert Sheckley or whatever, and then like not mention Octavia Butler. You know what I mean? It's like stuff like that. It's like you got to be aware of what you're doing and who you're sort of suggesting, and really sort of be like like you have to like sort of like self reflect. And that's what that's what I mean. Like it's like you gotta self reflect, because when you don't self reflect, people would just like run with that. They'll be like, oh, like, and especially like especially at 2019, especially if you are if you're a person of color, and especially if you're a black person, right? If it's me and I'm giving suggestions for like all white authors, people are gonna be like, oh, yeah, okay, it's dope. Like clearly, like you're a black man, but you gave me all these like white dude authors as suggestions, so it's okay for me to just read those white dude read these white dude authors and not look around for other things. And it's like, no. One, like it's like the onus is always sort of like on like the white individual to make sure that like they are checking themselves and they're checking like whatever how they are also sort of like spreading that that pervasive whiteness. But like you also have to sort of look at yourself and be like, all right, am I sort of like making it easier for this individual to like spread this like sort of this like particular sort of like rhetoric, this like sort of literary rhetoric, in a sense? And if I am, how do I change that? How do I shift gears? How do I switch that up? So for me, like Morrison is like a really, really great place to start. And I think like if you are more of sort of like a critical, like more into like sort of critical like text and not necessarily sort of like novels and fiction in that way. Although I will say I think everyone should read at least one Toni Morrison novel. At the very least, like you must. To me, you gotta read Beloved. You gotta read Beloved. And I think and then any other particular like Morrison, but I think Beloved is like so important. There's a reason why it won the Nobel Peace Prize for Literature in '93. Like there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. You know what I mean? It's not just because like, oh, like, you know, all of her books are great, but like they just randomly chose Beloved. No, it's because Beloved is like one of what like at the time was one of the very sort of like few books that was sort of like well known that tackled chattel slavery in such a painfully open and honest sort of way. And when you hear Morrison's when you listen to Morrison's interview, you could find that interview. I want to say you can find it on like YouTube, honestly, but you can find it online definitely. But when you watch that interview and you even like see Morrison sort of like talk about it, like I think it's even like difficult in certain ways for her to kind of talk about it. But at the same time, she understands that she must talk about it and she must be honest and open and deal with that pain and that history and that generational trauma, right? She must deal with that because like, right, like white dude across from her is, you know, maybe trying to avoid certain types of questions, like not that particular one, that particular interviewer, but in other interviews. And like this is something that she must do like consistently, right? Because white people especially will work to the bone to avoid dealing with this like history of and this history of oppression and this contemporary oppression. They will work and bend over backwards to avoid any sort of discussion of that, and they will work to make it seem like you're the one that's ridiculous for being critical of whiteness in 2019. They will bend over backwards to do that, right? So it's like that's why for me, like I'm always like, yo, I gotta put in effort. Right? I gotta do that. If I don't, it's a problem. All right. So again, like, and for me, like, it's a devastating thing, her loss, because like you understand why. Like for me, like it was so eye opening in different ways, and it really sort of pushed me to think about how I sort of study like literature, how I would like sort of do research, and Even like think about like the scholars that I was looking at and stuff like that. You know what I mean? But I'm telling you, man, people will, like I'm telling you, Morrison is so vital, because whenever you sort of watch an interview where that Morrison was in, she was always pushing the white person that was across from her. She was always pushing them to understand how certain questions that they posited were racist in their rhetoric, in their construction. And when you see when you would watch those interviews, when you would see like the white person like across from Morrison, just kind of like the gears would kind of start to turn. But they would also but you would also see them kind of try to like, defend themselves and not look like a racist. But it's like, dude, like you already look like a racist. Like you've already done the racist thing. Like you've already sort of consistently done that. So I don't know what you're doing trying to backtrack. All that does is make it worse. Right? So it's stuff like that where like Morrison consistently did that. Like she always did that work. She always did that work in the interviews, in discussions, in talking with people, in just living, and in writing. So like it's like for me, even in this community, like to me it's like people like must be aware of Morrison. They must be aware of certain authors. They must be aware of Octavia Butler. They must be aware of James Baldwin. They must be aware of Toni Morrison. They must be aware of current black authors. They must be aware of Roxane Gay. They must be aware of Samantha Irby. They must be aware of like certain writers who are putting in the work, right? They must be aware of Anelo Hopkinson. They must be aware of those people because they of an N.K. Jemisin, right? Like they must be aware of those folks. Like, and you have to sort of like put in the effort to like go out and say, all right, I'm gonna read this text. I'm gonna go read that text. I'm gonna go do that, right? You must be aware of Barbara Johnson. You must be aware of Barbara Christian. You must be aware of Sylvia Winter. Like it's like these are things, and that's not to say that you gotta go out and read all those things right now. But it's like there's like at the very least just pick one of those authors and try to sort of put in some effort and introduce yourselves to them and see how you feel and see what you learn and see how your sort of mind opens up in that way. I think it's important. All right. But today, man, like when I heard, I was in my class and I was in my summer class and like my students were taking a quiz and I was just like, and I was on my phone. I was like, I'm on my phone. They're taking a quiz. Like, right. Because I didn't have like anything that like on me. I should have brought something with me to grade, but I didn't. And I was like, so I was like, all right, I'm gonna go on my phone. So I was on my phone and boom, somebody just said, oh, Toni Morrison has passed away. And I was like, and immediately like this just wave of despair like washed over me. And it took a lot not to just like start sobbing like in the classroom. I was like, I should have just taken a walk outside, but I couldn't because like I'm cheating or anything. But like I should have just taken a walk outside and just said, all right, I'm gonna like deal with this and then come back, and deal with these like feelings. But I felt like a stream was like the best way for me to do it, because that's how I sort of deal with like a lot of different things, and I think like when you see folks on Twitter talking about why Morrison is so vital, some of that is only sort of like it's only sort of possible to sort of like understand it at your core when you've read that stuff. I would say if it was me and you wanted just like an introduction into sort of Morrison, who Morrison is as a novelist, check out The Bluest Eye, or check out The Bluest Eye, or check out Song of Solomon, right, to sort of start. Maybe even jazz, and then sort of move on to like other texts like Beloved, Sula, Tar Baby, A Mercy, Home, Love, like all those texts. And, like check those out. Check out those books. That's what I would do. And then if you're like into like if you want to check out the critical stuff, definitely start out looking at Playing in the Dark. Definitely check out The Source of Self-Regard. There are other texts as well that Morrison has sort of like published that are like critical texts. So check those out as well. But actually those two are like really good places to start. because they're like Playing in the Dark is like such an important seminal text that I would say start there. So that's what I would do. So again, like just like for all those out there, like novels, if you're looking for like fiction, start off with either The Bluest Eye, Song of Solomon, or Jazz, maybe even Sula. So because Sula's a bit earlier, and like it's a good way to sort of like see her like earlier sort of like writing style in a sense. And maybe those four. So Sula, Jazz, Song of Solomon, Bluest Eye. So those kind of four I think are good places to start. And then if you're thinking about critical theory and like criticism and like speeches and that sort of thing, The Source of Self-Regard, which is her most recent sort of text, and her collection, and Playing in the Dark, which is like super important for anyone who is like thinking about black literature in general, blackness and all of that, and whiteness. So I would say that's where I would start. All right, so thank y'all. All right, I'm gonna get out of here. I gotta leave because it is 9:52. I'm usually in bed a bit earlier, and I gotta feed my cats. So I'm gonna do that. Thank y'all for coming through. Thank you for just like letting me, just kind of like talk through this stuff, talk through my feelings and all of that. And many apologies, right? Like for the beginning of the stream because it was just like a little funky and OBS was being weird. I'm gonna change the title to test run for OBS. Morrison. Right, remember Toni Morrison. So I'm gonna save that. All right, and yo, thank y'all for coming through. All right, dope. Yeah, check out Beloved. Beloved is like intense. It's intense, but it's like there's a reason why I won a Nobel Peace Prize. Like there's like reason. There's a reason why she won a Nobel Peace Prize for that. Like there is a reason. So definitely check it out. All right, and thank y'all for coming through. All right, I'm the Black Manga Critic, y'all, and I'm out ya.